This week on the Sports Initiative podcast, I sit down with founder of Performance Reimagined, Lauren Ammon. She discusses her athletic journey and why that's created a passion for supporting performance athletes, the challenges and pressure for athletes, and her theory around the 4-year Olympic cycles, as well as the purpose for Performance Reimagined and how they're trying to help athletes cope with the challenges and pressures of the modern day sporting world. As always, if you enjoy this podcast, please make sure you share it with friends and family. I hope you enjoy. Perfect. So, Lauren, I know that this has been a long time in the making through schedule slash me being on holiday and whatnot. But yeah, really glad to be able to get this into the diary. How are things in your world? Are you all good?
Oh, good. For us here in the US, a lot of big sports things are coming up. They're just ending. So, it's always a good time to be ready to go and work with athletes, quite honestly.
Yeah, I know you're a Bengals fan, so we won't touch on the Super Bowl or run to Super Bowl. We'll steer clear of that one. But they were close. They're getting closer. So you never know. Maybe next year.
Yeah, let's hope so. I'll keep my opinions and my perceptions about what went down to myself. But, there's also a silver lining in that they didn't play in the Super Bowl. So
Yeah.
I'll hang on to that one.
And you lost to the team that won it. So it shows that you're there or thereabouts, which is never a bad thing.
No.
To begin with, for the listeners, can you just explain, I guess, who you are and what you do as a starting point?
Yeah, very, very short version. So I started swimming when I was 5 years old. As the story goes, I had two older sisters. My mother needed something to do with me as well. So she just threw me in and whoop, off I went. I don't remember falling in love with the sport, but that's what happened. I just felt so alive. I felt so myself, and swimming was just my world. So much so that I had the honor and privilege to be awarded a full scholarship to Eastern Michigan University, where I finished my swimming career and went off into the real world. I say that like breezing past it. It wasn't necessarily the easiest transition on the planet for me. Found myself in the human resources space from a professional point of view. Found also that wasn't my space and had been exposed to executive coaching. So I thought, that might be something I like to do. So I went and got my coaching certification and started my own practice in January of 2020, which, seemed a great idea at the time. And then obviously the world came to a grinding halt. And while I was still coaching, really focused on leadership development and career transition, again, found that necessarily wasn't my space. And then as the universe would have it, for me, just to wait to see what it brings me, the 2020 Olympics started, and it was the night that Simone Biles removed herself from competition. It was the same night that Katie Ledecky won gold in the 1500-meter freestyle, but didn't necessarily have the greatest swim. She was about 20 seconds off of her world record. And in that same night, Michael Phelps came on the telecast when he was in Tokyo and said the words that I had been thinking or feeling for 30 years, but didn't know how to articulate. And they were, competing is really overwhelming. We just want someone to talk to. We just want someone who listens, who allows us to be vulnerable and doesn't want to fix us. And it was in that moment that I thought, yeah, that's exactly how I felt as an athlete. No doubt that's how millions of other athletes feel. And so in that moment, I pivoted my business to work with high school aged athletes and college aged athletes to train their minds like they train their bodies.
Yeah, perfect. I think it provides a really nice overview in terms of you as a person and a little bit kind of as a practitioner to what you are now. I guess the easiest bit to describe to us to begin with is, why have you got a passion for this area? Why does it resonate with you so much?
Well, as an athlete, there was always this nagging feeling, reality, whatever, whatever word you want to use to it, that like I just couldn't completely unleash my potential. Right. And as I looked back on my athletic career after I was out, it was like I just couldn't get out of my own head. I didn't know how to remove those blocks of everything has to be perfect. I have to be on in this moment. Every race that I have has to reflect how well I'm doing in practice. And if I don't do it, what will mom think? What will dad think? What will coach think? What will my teammates think? Hell, what will I think? And it was always just this pressure and almost like lack of identity in a way, like full identity as a swimmer, but like lack of identity of what I was in the swimming world. And I just had this nagging, like, how do I get out of this trap? And that's where it came from. And at the time, I'll date myself, I was a product of the late 90s, early 2000s. That was my prime. And talking to someone about these kinds of things wasn't necessarily not a thing, but it also wasn't really talked about or really publicized as an option for athletes.
I think this is probably a nice junction to mention kind of what the pressures of collegiate athletes are. Obviously, it's a slightly different system to what we have in the UK and maybe different to Europe, etc. So do you just want to explain to people that maybe don't know, aren't as familiar with the product, actually what the pressures of collegiate sport and then maybe that transition to professional sport can look like for someone who's of 18 years old, 19 years old, and how challenging that can be for some of those athletes?
Yeah, well, the pressure is to perform at all moments, right? And thinking about it from a scholarship, the idea that the school is paying you to, or is paying for, not paying you, but paying for your education, right? So there's the pressure of maintaining specific grades in order to maintain that scholarship. I certainly had an added pressure on top of that. So I had a combination of an academic scholarship and an athletic scholarship to create the full ride. So I had to hold a certain grade level, or what we call a GPA, above and beyond what, quote unquote, I hate to say normal athletes, that's not what I mean, but I just had to have something on top of that. So there's always that pressure to perform, to maintain your eligibility, as we call it. And the normal pressures of wanting to perform, right? I mean, every athlete wants to go out there and win. So you always have that pressure of, am I going to be able to reach the goals that I want to reach in order to show that I have validity and value in this space? On any sport, there's also the pressure of maintaining your position, right? So in swimming, there are obviously people who swim the same events, and while you're not necessarily, well, no, that's not true. What I was going to say is you're not necessarily pitted against one another, but you kind of are if you want to be on the traveling team. So, the team that actually goes to other schools and competes, you don't take the entire team depending on the sport. Like in football, you still don't actually, thinking about what my nephew goes through, but it's all of those pressures. And then of course, a pressure to get an education, right? Every athlete, as particularly those in college, know that 99% of us aren't going to go compete in the professional level. So it really is all about getting a good education so that once you're done and you're forced to retire because there's nowhere else to go beyond college, you have something to fall back on and to be successful in that space.
And how much of a challenge is it, I guess, on the campus space? I know, like, if you look at football, for example, they're going to be, almost like rock stars walking around their campus and whatnot. But how big a challenge is that for, young athletes, using yourself and experience or other people in terms of, I'm at Ohio State, I'm at Michigan, I'm at Florida, and the expectation to perform in front of 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, 100,000 fans, which there is in the American collegiate system, right? It's quite full on in terms of people watching, eyes on, being on ESPN, which we don't have over here with those younger athletes traditionally.
Yeah, I would say on those bigger sports, that absolutely adds to the pressure, and great call out, because that wasn't necessarily my experience, right? I mean, swimming is considered a quote unquote small sport, particularly in collegiate athletics. We don't bring in a ton of money. We're not a revenue generating sport. I actually learned, and I don't want anyone to, quote me and hold me to this, but the majority of college athletics operate in the red, meaning they lose money more than they make. With the exception of big football programs, big basketball programs, a lot of those fuel the other sports. So in a way, even if the athletes don't think about that, or it doesn't register for them, which would make total sense that it wouldn't register for, CJ Stroud, that, oh, I'm paying for the, swimming team at Ohio State. But there is that pressure of, when you are in the horseshoe and you're playing in front of 105,000 fans, fanatic fans, right? That yes, that is another that is another part of it. And for anybody, what's new to collegiate athletics as well is this concept of name, image, and likeness. And we in America call that the NIL for short, in that it's a new legislation, I guess, for lack of a better term, that allows collegiate athletes to now actually be paid, be sponsored for who they are, their name, their talent, right? Because the whole hullabaloo was that the schools are making so much money off of these really high level talented athletes. Now there should be an opportunity for these athletes to make money for themselves. So therein lies another pressure that exists for college athletes, is to, I'm really talented. How much money can I make from this?
And I know we discussed this when we caught up previously, but that potentially brings some challenges with family and friends and whatnot as well, I'd imagine, right? Could you just talk us through what that might look like in terms of some of the extra strains that are put on those individuals that, have to decide where they want to go to school, and how what they might be able to financially make might be a real big motivation for some people around them?
Yeah. And this is my personal philosophy. I'm not saying that this is, the end all be all, but it would add another layer of pressure, particularly as you're growing into the collegiate space of, hey, really talented athletes who show that talent at 9, 10, 11, 12, the understandably the wheels start spinning of, oh, how much earning potential might there be in the next 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, however long years, that parents start to see it and potentially feel that pressure, whether they know it or not, and then naturally, or maybe unconsciously, then kind of project that pressure onto their athlete. And we've seen many a time athletes who, do make a lot of money, before name, image, and likeness came onto the scene, and all of a sudden droves of friends now become a part of their inner circle because, hey, there's a lot of money there. People can be taken care of in that respect. And take all of this together, particularly for those who are just coming out of high school in the US. So they're 17, 18, 19 years old, going into college with this new opportunity and everything that it presents for somebody in their lifetime, that, or somebody who in their development cycle may not completely understand or have or grasp what all of this opportunity really means for them. And if they don't necessarily have a strong mental foundation, that the breaking points that might be experienced simply because they're not completely developed or didn't fully embrace the idea of, how might I train my mind in order to be able to support all of what I'm going through.
And I guess it becomes equally challenging in terms of that dynamic with, family and friends. Of, you look at famous pop stars or movie stars, they end up paying for their parents' houses or parents' cars or siblings to have food on the table and stuff. And if you resonate that to most of us listening, and you're 18 years old and having that pressure in your head, that is not optimal for probably performing in whatever sport that you're in. So I think there's obviously the extra layer of that, and then you begin to wonder, who can I actually trust in this? Because are they in it for themselves, or are they in it for what's best for me? And those obviously don't always align in terms of what college that you might go to that fits your style of play, or the best opportunity to progress onto NFL, NBA, MLB, whatever that looks like. So I think that it must be an increasing minefield for players at high school ages of trying to figure out what's best for them and what's being considered maybe best for everyone around them.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, even though there's potentially a lot of money to be made based on your talent as an athlete, venture to guess 99.999% of athletes truly love the game and just want to perform to the best of their ability. And this, all of these other distractions pulling them away and potentially making what they love to do most that much harder. And the anguish that can come with that. I'm not saying it happens to everybody, but the anguish that can come for those who may not necessarily be in the best position yet to handle all of that.
For sure. And before we go into what you do, what your actually thing is, one thing we spoke about previously was kind of the pressures of being like the face of. I think you provided a really nice analogy around Olympic cycles and being the face of an Olympics and then almost dropping off the face of the earth beyond that and whatnot. Could you just talk through, I guess, any experiences you've had with athletes that worked in that space, or what you see as that Olympic cycle, and some of the challenges that people and athletes can face within that space?
Yeah, for anybody not familiar with U.S. sports, we do a great job of building people up. We also do a great job of tearing them down. Be honest. So if you tend to look at our Olympic cycle here in the U.S., what tends to happen, right? So we're about a little over a year out for the 2024 Olympics, and so you'll start to see, certain names, certain images being put up relative to the sport. So a perfect example of when Michael Phelps was still swimming, right? His face was all over the Olympics every summer or every Summer Olympics. And then they picked 2 or 3 more. So last Olympics, it was Simone Biles, it was Katie Ledecky, and it was Caleb Dressel. For anybody familiar, he's a sprint freestyler and butterflyer here in the U.S. Absolutely phenomenal athlete. I attest doing that gives them credit for their talents, but it also could potentially create this expectation of what to live up to. And then what can happen is when athletes don't necessarily perform the way that the U.S. builds them up, well, then it becomes kind of, well, you drop off and then we're just going to go find another name to fill your spot, whether that's in the same sport or a completely different sport. But that tends to be the cycle that we see here in the US, that it's like, we'll put 3 to 4 faces to the Olympics. We hope they do well. And when they do, we'll celebrate the heck out of them after. And, for the several months later, we'll do the same. We'll bring them back up, 15 to 18 months before the Olympics start again. Hopefully they perform well. If they don't, well, then we'll, kind of put another face to the marketing of it all, when really it's all about celebrating their talents, right? I'm going to be really cynical in this space right now, that it is a marketing ploy. And, understandably, we want viewership. That's really what they're going after, in viewership. And these athletes do deserve as many eyes on them as possible because of their talent, but at the same time, being cognizant of what all of those eyes and that pressure can mount to.
I guess it's challenging for those that it's their first cycle. So for like Michael Phelps, for example, he's this, for lack of a better phrase, it's not his first rodeo. Once you've done that for 2 or 3 cycles, you go, okay, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to have done no interviews for the last 2.5 years. Now every person's going to want a little bit of me. I'm going to be in a big studio in Hollywood one day, and then I'm going to be in Arkansas doing a local TV network the next one, and I'm going to be floating around there. Whereas if that's your first Olympics, I can imagine that purely from a physical toll could be quite overawing in terms of having to go through that, having your face everywhere, having everyone come and speak to you in the streets and stuff. Is that something that has been attested to by some of those individuals where it is their first Olympics and they have come out and said how shocked they were by that level of, I guess, intrusiveness / marketing / whatever you want to call it?
Yeah, so I personally have never heard those kinds of phrases. A lot of what I say and feel is speculation on my part, just being an outside observer. But a perfect example of if you look at Katie Ledecky's first Olympics, where she was quote unquote no one. I say that in terms of most people didn't know her name, how well she performed. And I want to say that was 2012. And so she was kind of this breakout star. She was still 15, I think. So I don't know that there was a ton of intrusiveness following the 2012 Olympics on her part because of her age and kind of where she was in her cycle, right? Then look at her in 2016, where she swam out of her absolute mind, and had a wonderful meet. And then you started to see her, be much more of a face. And again, I haven't spoken to her. I've never necessarily heard it. Another great example is Michael Phelps after 2008, when he did the whole thing where he got 8 Olympic golds, right, in one meet, kind of set the record or tied the record, if I can't remember. But then look at him in 2012. If memory serves, it was between 2008 and 2012 where he had some of his, not so highlight moments, where DUIs and potentially, smoking marijuana. And he even admitted after that he wasn't completely into the 2012 Olympics. And you could almost kind of like see it on him as you were watching it. But what I did have the opportunity to actually speak to one gold medal winner who will protect the privacy, is that following it was either 12 or 16, there was a huge depression. It was like, do I want to do this again? Do I want to go another 4 years and this person said, while I am so many things, I am this well-rounded human, what I'm really known for is a race that took less than 2 minutes. And that is where, everyone recognizes who I am. And so, I do think there is some truth somewhere to this, build you up and, what is it after I've reached this pinnacle? What does that really mean for me? Who does that make me? What do I want to do? And how do I bounce back from this?
Yeah, and I think it's important to explain as well. So in the UK, we kind of have maybe 1 or 2 TV programs that will talk about sports all day. So you've got Sky Sports News is the main one that comes to mind that most people will watch. The rest of the stuff around that, we've got multiple sites. It might be Sky Sports Football, Sky Sports Cricket, Sky Sports F1, etc. And on a radio perspective, we've got something called Talk Sport, which again probably covers the majority of sports and whatnot. Now, from my understanding, you guys are like completely exploded on there. I mean, I can go on YouTube and find like First Take or Colin Coward or whatever you want to do. So before we come on to what you do to support these athletes, do you just want to explain, I guess, how overbearing potentially the media could be with the number of outlets and sources and stuff that are around athletes that maybe have absolutely nothing to do with one another, so they would have to go and do multiple interviews during a day or whatnot?
Oh gosh, yes. So we'll use probably football is probably American football is probably the best example of that. So from an outlet standpoint, we have ESPN. There's ESPN2, there's ESPN3, there's ESPN University, there's ESPN. There's a number of different outlets, and like, how do I explain this? Like the lower you go down in that hierarchy, that's where they cover more of the smaller sports, where ESPN covers a lot of football, basketball, MLB, hockey, right? The big sports that we have here in the US. We also have the NFL network. We have that is completely and utterly dedicated to the NFL, and not just during the National Football League, and not just during football season, which is basically from August until February. From February until March, or February till August, we're talking about the draft. We're talking about what the teams look like and everything. Most of our Power 5, I think all of our Power 5 conferences, so collegiate, like big collegiate systems from the Big 10, the Big 12, the Pac-12, the ACC and the SEC all have their own channels. And so you can, actually catch any number of sports. We have the US Olympic Channel. I mean, it's everywhere. Not to mention, as you said, all of these analysts who have podcasts, who have their own shows, who have their own Instagram, Twitter, the handles everywhere, right? So athletes are constantly inundated with sources talking about not only them, but their other athletes. And everyone has an opinion. Everyone can chime in. And so it's just truly is constant sport chatter all day long.
Yeah, I think you've given a nice picture in terms of how young it starts. So you said the collegiate stuff, that's 18. So, you know, if you've got a TV channel that's specific for your conference that you're in or the league that you're in, they're going to talk about you. If you're at a major school or major university, they're going to talk about you, you know, probably every day. And then that rolls all the way through to obviously the more obvious ones when you start going to your Lakers, your Knicks, your Yankees, whoever, when you're in big markets, and naturally you're going to be the talk of the town. So I think, yeah, it gives a really good insight as to what that actually looks like and what that face of the Olympics looks like. Because you mentioned if, you know, some of them start doing some crossover work where, you know, LeBron James being compared to Michael Phelps in terms of stature and stuff, you're getting a lot of coverage from a lot of areas. So I think it probably brings us quite nicely now into what do you do to support them? So could you just explain, I guess, your role in trying to support the younger athletes, but then also anyone obviously who's in a performance space? What type of services, what type of offer do you put in place to try and support them navigate some of these high pressurized challenges that we've mentioned?
Yeah, and it really was intentional to start at the high school space because we particularly really our deepest niche is working with the high school athletes who want to take their talents into college, and knowing that with that comes all sorts of pressures, one that they already experience and two that they'll experience when they get to college. In the simplest terms, the services we provide is a free, an open and judgment-free space to unleash what they're thinking, what they're feeling, without any sort of preconceived notion of fixing who they are, because the belief is they're not broken. It's simply that they don't necessarily have all the tools yet to manage what they think, feel, and how they behave. So first and foremost, that's the environment that we create. It's just an open, judgment-free space to just come and literally just verbally, emotionally, mentally, and in some ways throw up on somebody who is completely removed from your situation and can be objective with you, who will hold a loving space, but will also challenge you in terms of, you know, what is it that, how might you be contributing to what you're experiencing without blame, simply that you just didn't know any better, right? You know, we all grow up as conditioned humans. So what about that conditioning isn't work for you, and how do we reprogram it? In the simplest terms, that's what we do. And so we dig into what is it they're currently thinking, what is it they're currently feeling, and how is that translating to their performance?
Perfect. So I guess a really good starting point is, what does success look like? So if I said to you that you guys have done your job well, what does that look like for you and your athletes?
Yeah, well, we're super open to say it's really hard to measure what we do, right? And success really is, and we're very open with the athletes to say that's why we look at you to do a lot of the work too, right? This isn't us doing the work for you. This is us creating awareness of what can be done in order for you to do the work. So success is going to look different for every single athlete. So some specific examples of current or past clients is working with a soccer player who soccer, American soccer, right? Who comes to games so fearful that she is not going to play to the best of her ability. It's like she reverse engineers her talent so that she plays cautiously because she's afraid of messing up, of not doing well. And so for her, success looks like coming to games completely confident and being okay if she misses a pass or misses a goal, or actually handles the ball at the volume she should, that there's this fear that she's a ball hog and that no one is going to like her, right? So success for her is being able to remove all those barriers and to come and play to the best of her ability without shame or a fear that people are going to be mad at her for her talent. Another is a football player who has been in this American football player who's been in this. I don't know if I should play. I don't know if I want to play. Do I stay at my current school and be miserable and play, or not play? Or do I potentially, in my senior year, so the last year of high school, do I move schools and take a chance on playing a sport that I love and really recognizing my potential? And so success for him is making the best decision possible in terms of where he wants to play and if he wants to play. A swimmer was, getting through her senior year of high school, competing to the top of her level in order to get the scholarship and to get into the school that she wants. And success for her was just a couple of weeks ago, she was accepted to the school of her choice and will be on the team. So for every athlete, it's different, but it all stems from just the stuff standing in their way in terms of how do I get rid of it so I can get what I want.
No, I think that's a really nice broad spectrum of examples there. So I guess one of the challenges you'll have is understanding the context for each individual, because again, from a simple perspective, you've got geography that will change how people, are and what their beliefs are, to culturally, to how they've been brought up, and the different pressures we spoke about before. So how do you go around, I guess, understanding the context of someone prior to obviously trying to support them, because that is a big part of it, of being able to go, okay, I understand where these pressures are coming from. Have you thought about exploring X, Y, Z? So yeah, how do you go around understanding that context that they're in?
Yeah. So the first part of the process is to get to know the parents and the athletes. It's really important from a parental perspective, from a couple of different areas. One, I'll be blunt, are they contributing to part of the problem, right? Being able to talk with them and understand, okay, maybe how you're approaching your athlete, could that potentially be part of the issue? And I'm going to say this in a very loving way because I'm a parent of children. In some ways, the parent is always a contributing factor. It just depends on the level and quote unquote severity. We all want the best for our kids, and oftentimes that comes through our own lens versus the lens of the child. And so, things can get murky and there. But also, are the parents, how much are the parents playing a role? How open are they to this kind of work, right? And every single parent that we've come to is they see the appreciation of supporting their child from a completely different angle, that it isn't always about the physical side of the game. There truly is a huge component when it comes to the mental side of the game. And once I've spoken to the parents, or anybody's spoken to the parents, then we go to the athlete to see, how much is the athlete really into this? How much are they going to work to actually figure out how to get out of their own way? And then from there, once everyone's a yes, and including on our side, because there are times when, it isn't the right fit to work with the athlete, spend a lot of time digging into the athlete, like going through a number of different scenarios. What are some of your best performances? What are some of your worst performances? And, one of my superpowers is being able to see the bigger picture and see how dots connect. And then from there, creating that picture of context, and then going back to both the athlete and their parents and saying, hey, this is what we've uncovered in these first couple of sessions. Does this sound accurate? And if so, then here are the 2 to 3 points that we are going to work on in order to support them in moving forward.
Yeah, I think that makes complete sense. And as you said, kind of having that circle, that loop process to say, right, we're going to start here. And actually, before we then go for our next plan, is this accurate from your perspective? So yeah, could you, I guess, tell us about some of the barriers that you face regarding, obviously you're working with these athletes, with parents, and you might, all three parties go, actually, we're going to sign off on this. We think it's really going to be useful, and what you've highlighted we see as well. What are some of the barriers you face in terms of the actual implementation of some of the strategies you're using? So it might be, for example, if you've got someone who you've mentioned there, the soccer player that is finding it really challenging to go into a game scenario with a level of confidence that actually I'm doing what I'm meant to be doing. I'm doing what my super strength is. And, if I give a bad pass away, that's okay because of X, Y, Z. What type of barriers would that type of individual face that you guys have to help them overcome?
What came up specifically for that client, actually a barrier for her, would be the belief that it can be different, and constantly reminding her that it's okay not to be 100%, because your 100% is different every single time you go onto the pitch. And it's helping her to see that she has a much bigger impact on those, or a much bigger positive impact on those around her than she believes that she has. And so there was actually a conversation. She's actually on the younger end, so she's 12 years old, and she has huge aspirations to play at Stanford, which is one of the biggest universities here in the United States, one of the most prestigious, both academically and athletically, and then play for the women's national soccer team. And so, it was her call to work with someone like us in order to support her in that. But there was a scenario that in one of our first sessions, she was like, we talk about what it means to be an elite athlete. And we always talk about that being elite has everything to do with your mindset and very little to do with your skill set. And, we go through a certain number of characteristics that we've defined makes you, or allows you to be elite. And one of those is inspirational. And she's like, I'm not inspirational. No one looks to me to be anything. And then literally the next session, I got a note from her mother that said, somebody came up to her and wears the same equipment as she does, or started to wear the same things she does, because they look to her as an absolute inspiration, to be the person they want to be as they grow in their athletic career. And so the barriers are always going to be individual to the athlete, but at the end of the day, it's really the belief in themselves that they have it and they can bring it to the table, and it's just removing all the head trash that keeps them from seeing it.
And how does that change contextually? Because I could imagine if you've got coaches that act in a particular way, or particularly demand in a particular way, the resilience to either deal with some challenging feedback. The coach might be particularly blunt. He might go Greg Popovich style and just go, I'm just going to tell you exactly what I think. Or it might be a communication piece, or actually this athlete's really struggling to communicate with the coach effectively about how they're feeling, or the challenges they're having, or why maybe they think moving a slightly different direction is a good idea. How do you work with them, I guess, on some of those challenges, in terms of, right, that's in your context, as obviously you've mentioned there regarding the personal perspective, but in your context you've identified that you struggle with relationships with a couple of players, or you struggle having dialogue around analysis with this individual. How do you support them with that? Because obviously that could potentially be another barrier that's going to stop them performing, if they don't feel like they can have that dialogue or get the most out of every situation.
Yeah, and that's really diving into them as a person, because I'm the firm believer that if you're struggling with communication, that's 90% you, potentially 10% the other person, or whatever the percentage is, or whatever you believe. But it's really digging into who they are, and what about either that person or that situation or that coach are they really troubled? Because I'll use my own specific example. So in college, I couldn't stand my head coach. Like, he and I just butt heads like no one's business. But my specific distance coach, or my stroke coach, let's call it, whatever, I'll equate it to that. He and I had a phenomenal relationship. And so it wasn't that I couldn't communicate or I didn't know how to do it effectively or create relationships. It was simply the difference in personality, in energy, in philosophy, in values. And at the time, I had no idea how to get past that, other than to just be combative with my coach, to be completely honest. I felt it was, if he was going to be an ass, I could be an ass right back, kind of thing. Not necessarily the most mature thing in the world, but hey, that's the situation that it was. So, if we, in full transparency, haven't necessarily come up with that kind of challenge yet based on the athletes that we've worked with, but knowing what I know based on not only my own experience, but having, education in these spaces, is what about that particular coach or that particular situation is keeping you? Because you obviously have the skills to do it with other people. It's that one person, and it's your response to that one person or that one situation that requires attention in order to get past it. And that's when it would be digging into that person and saying, okay, what is it about this? And then coming up with, I'm a big experimenter. So that's what I often talk about with athletes, is that, we may try something. It may not work, right? So we'll try this one thing based on what we came to a conclusion of what might work today. We'll try it. Okay. We'll come back. Hey, was that a red, yellow, green? Did that really work? Did it kind of work? Or do you want to take that off the table and we'll never talk about it again? So that's the expectation that we set with athletes, is that this isn't going to be like, we're going to one fix and done. It's, we're going to experiment. And if it doesn't work, we'll figure it out.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice analogy you've pointed to there, in terms of that communication piece. And it is, I guess, challenging for a multitude of reasons. It doesn't necessarily mean that either of you are coming from a bad position. It's just like, for whatever reason, we don't get on. I guess the question for me off the back of that is, have you seen this change, or do you see the change between like generations? So obviously you've worked in a specific generation, or you competed, and then obviously you've been in the HR space and stuff. You work with slightly older athletes that are now in college. You work with younger athletes that are coming through different systems. Do you see differences from age groups to age groups in terms of what their preference is, what they do like, what they don't like, how they're able to interact, how they're not able to interact? And if you do, could you just explain to us what some of those observations have been?
Yeah. Sorry, my Alexa's giving me a reminder. There are differences and there are similarities. I think the similarity is that no matter the generation and no matter how you've been raised, you certainly want someone to talk to who is going to listen to you for who you are and not try to change you or think that you're broken. So I think there's a similarity in that respect. What also comes up is that actually might be a little bit more of a desire for the younger generation, simply because of how they've grown up. Their go-to is to be behind a screen, to in some ways say whatever is on their mind, but also not say what's on their mind. And that sometimes they like say everything, but nothing at the same time. And that's not a knock. It's more of that from how society was as they grow. There are times when, we're having a one-on-one session and they're constantly on the phone, or they're like constantly distracted, and it's just kind of how they operate. I would say the difference is, from my generation as well, as growing up in the late 90s, early 2000s, and even before, it was kind of like, put your head down, suck it up, and move on. That doesn't work anymore, right? They're looking for ways to feel different, to be different, even if they can't articulate or explain what it is behind it. They just want relief from this like anguish that they feel. And there's been some conversations that I've had with coaches, and a number of them have said it, is that the younger generation, or the current generation, right, can't handle adversity, and they don't know how to communicate. And it's not that they can't or they don't, it's that I don't know that they've ever been shown how to do it, right? And that there's also been conversations among coaches that these kids are 15, 16, 17, 18, but chronologically, but behaviorally they're 12, 13, 14, 15, and there's speculation that had to do with the pandemic, is that like from a maturation standpoint or from a development standpoint, some of that was halted, and it's kind of 2 or 3 years behind the curve. And coaches who are now in their 40s or 50s, who grew up in the put your head down, suck it up and move on, that tends to be the well, that's what worked for me, so that's what's going to work for you. But growing up in two different worlds, like putting your head down, sucking it up and moving on, isn't an option, or isn't necessarily as much of an option because of what they're growing up. Everyone has an opinion on what they're doing, provided they choose to put it out for everybody to comment on. And so it's not so easy to move on from someone personally attacking you online, even if they have no idea who you are. Again, that comes with putting yourself out there and making that choice, but then not necessarily having the skills to deal with it. I think those are the biggest differences.
And do you think that that's something that at those older age groups you can be taught? So like what I'm seeing a lot in collegiate space, for example, is a lot of transfer portal work where it seems like an athlete goes somewhere, it goes wrong for a year, and they leave and go somewhere else, or they don't. Like the Jalen Hurts, I think, is a really nice example. Mm-hmm. He was at Alabama, one of the top American football schools in the country, mm-hmm. got benched for Tua Tagovailoa.
I'm gonna look at you. I still can't even pronounce it.
Yeah, I'm a Dolphins fan, so I've given it a good go. But yeah, and then obviously Jalen Hurts has gone, right, not for me, and left. Now, listen, that's probably turned out to be a pretty good decision with where he is now. But it seems like the transfer portal is becoming more and more prominent. So I just wonder, is there place within your type of work or within coaching to actually try and educate the generation around, okay, there's going to be resilience around this, and here's why it's important. Don't just run and duck and dive and go somewhere else. Actually, this may be the best thing that ever happens to you for the long term. Like the classic ones, Michael Jordan, didn't get on his varsity team. But do you think we're capable of educating them around that and getting buy-in from it, or do you think it's something that we're going to miss, and 5-10 years from now people are going to go, actually I wish I'd stuck at it because that might have helped me in the long term?
Yeah, that's a phenomenal question, because you have so many great examples on both sides of the equation, right? Joe Burrow is another example who didn't get the starting position at Ohio State. Now look at him. Here's my answer. Yes, I believe it can be taught. I believe the idea of resilience and sticking it out and figuring out how to make your current situation work can be taught. Do I always believe it's the best solution? Not necessarily, because it can prove to work. Though I would also argue that those athletes, talking about Jalen Hurts, look, he did pretty well for himself. Joe Burrow, look, he did pretty well for himself. Both of their talent and both of their situations, though, are rooted in resilience, but maybe from a different lens than, let's say, Michael Jordan, right? Michael Jordan continued to stick it out, whereas they use their resilience to say, hey, I know I've been knocked down. I know I've got more to give. I have an opportunity to use the resilience that I've gotten from that to then apply to another situation. So I think that's a really tough. It's a great question. I think it's a tough question because I think it depends on the individual and the athlete, but they're all kind of rooted in the same coin, just a different side of that coin.
No, I think that's interesting. You said the lens that you're probably taking in terms of actually, is it quitting, or is it going, I'm going to move to a more favorable circumstance, and I'm going to analyze my circumstance and move to a more favorable one and take a bit of ownership from me. But what I'm going to do is learn from this scenario in this way. So actually, lack of resilience isn't the not sticking it out there. It's the lack of resilience would be quitting if the same thing happens again, rather than addressing some of my challenges or whatever that looks like. I think that's a really interesting point.
Yeah. Tom Brady would be another example, right, of sticking it out where you were, being at Michigan and not being literally much of anything.
Yeah. And then
But
ended
then
up
look
being
what
all right. Yeah.
yeah, it ended up being okay. 3 Hall of Fame careers in one, that's
Did
figured it
okay.
out.
And then I guess a question for me, from your experience and the people that you've worked with that have, began to progress or have, I'm going to put this in inverted commas, become high performers. What key identifiers, key characteristics have you seen that they've had that's allowed them to navigate their way through, times of excelling and high performance, or in times of struggle through injury or poor performance, to allow them, I guess, to have a level of consistency when they get to that top end to go, actually, they're perceived a relatively high performer in their sport?
Yeah, I think some of those markers is resilience. I believe that resilience is probably the number one skill for any human to develop. But for those from a high performance and being able to do it consistently, it is that level of resilience that I can be knocked down, and I know that being knocked down isn't going to identify who I am. It's what I do after being knocked down, and I'm going to make the choice to get up and keep going. I would also say, though, that sometimes athletes can be overdeveloped in resilience, and by that, just continuing to keep getting up without learning from what happened and being able to apply that so that the next time it's even more effective. That's another story for a different day. Resilience, courage. The courage to ask for support, whether that be from coach, from mom, from dad, from someone like me, from a nutritionist, from a strength and conditioning coach, like the courage to want to be better, and paired with the willingness to do the work it takes to get there. I love the book It Takes What It Takes by Trevor Malwad. I don't necessarily agree with everything in there, but I do agree with the concept of, if you want something really big, you have no choice other than to put in the work to do it. That doesn't mean that you put your head down, suck it up and move on, but you're willing to do the work it takes to get there and to give everything you have in order to get it.
Perfect. And we're quickly approaching the time we allotted for this, so I'm going to ask you 2 more questions, and then I guess the second to last one is, where do you see this going? So with what the service you're providing, and where would be the gold standard of, in 1 year's time, 5 years time, 10 years time, I want it to look like this, and this is the rationale as to why.
Yeah, so so knowing that not everyone can or wants to work one-on-one, right? To spend that time, to find that time, they are busy athletes who go to school, who work out, who do their practice. We are working on what we're calling peak performance zone. So it would be an online resource that athletes can reference and tap into to do mental training minutes a day on their own time and on their own schedule or at their own pace. But we will provide a roadmap, so to speak, or what we're calling a success path in terms of what that looks like, and for them to be able to kind of pick and choose within that, to be able to give them an assessment at the beginning that pinpoints, hey, maybe you want to do this, maybe you want to do this, this is what you'll get the most out of. But 1 to 5 to 10 years time of really rounding that out to be what I'm calling like a lifestyle brand. So it's not just mental training, but we're working to build the whole athlete. So bringing in nutritional expertise, bringing in movement and strength training and conditioning. So it's this one-stop shop, for lack of a better term, and of where high-performing elite athletes can get the most expert advice and input and training and education from a number of different areas to round out their entire experience, and provide them with the resources that, rather than go to all these different places, we can give them one central hub in order to find all of that.
Perfect. Yeah, makes complete sense, should I say, in terms of being able to, go, actually, I need a bit of support in this area, rather than going and exploring other people. I've got it right there, and they can join the dots, so to speak. And then the last one for me is, if I were to speak to any of the athletes that you've worked with, how would you want them to describe you in 3 words, and why?
3 words. One, I love the number 3. So awesome. Open. It's so hard. Open, caring, and easy. And by easy, I mean, we don't add a level of complexity to it. It's just, I'm going to take easy out. I'm going to say accepting.
Okay. And why those three?
Accepting, and that they feel completely and utterly accepted no matter what's going on, because that is who I am. One of my superpowers is to just, see people for who they are without judgment for how they got there. Now that you say it, like open is, they feel drawn, just like, come on in, this is the place for you. We're gonna, understand where you are. We're gonna give you some ideas on how to really reach the level that you want to reach. And I'm gonna be completely honest, what is the third word that I said?
Caring.
Yes, thank you. Just so they know that, not everyone out there is ready to jump in and say, here's what you're doing wrong. It's more of like, oh, here's what you're doing really well. We're going to capitalize on that. Here's where you've got some growth opportunities, and let's just figure out what that looks like, with no judgment in terms of how you got here or where you're going. We're just going to have fun, and we're going to experience it along the way.
Perfect. So if people are interested in trying to find you, where can they find you, your work, etc., and maybe get in touch?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's performancereimagined.com. And then on Instagram, it's at performance_reimagined_. And for any parents out there, whether you're on LinkedIn, I've made a presence there. So it's under Lauren Ammon.
Perfect. Listen, I really appreciate your time, and I'm sure we'll stay in contact and catch up again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks for listening to the Sports Initiative podcast with me, Michael Wright. Please remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram at the Sports Initiative Podcast, and share this podcast with friends and family. I'll see you next week.